Let me start out this video by saying the world is a much safer place than your fear wants you to believe. This video in particular is not meant to scare you. It's meant to make you aware and prepared for many possible scenarios, as unlikely as they will be. Let me be very clear. In most cases, the news does not portray an accurate picture of what the world is. They only highlight the worst situations. That is their job. That's how they get their views. Not traveling out of a fear of kidnappings, terrorist attacks, and natural disasters is absolutely ridiculous. Unless, of course, you're planning to visit a place where that stuff is prevalent. And even then, these occurrences are so much more unlikely than we perceive them to be. True story, I've met some people on the road who promised me they will never go to New York City because of what happened on 9/11. That's pretty silly. On the other hand, maybe Caracas, Venezuela isn't the best place for a family vacation at this time. So you have to be aware of the likelihood of something happening. If there's a high likelihood, you choose somewhere else. And to do this, the best place to check is going to the State Department's website before you go traveling. They have all the different up-to-date information on threats and warnings, but again, it's their job to inform you of every possible negative situation. So if you looked at some of these countries in the reports, you would never want to go there. For example, Chicago gets a bad rap in the news. They're one of the highest crime rates in the United States, and there's a lot of gang violence, but I would have no reservations of going to Chicago. The north side of Chicago is a beautiful place to be. Different neighborhoods, it's an incredible city. And if you only let the headlines deter you from going somewhere, you're gonna miss out on a lot of incredible places. And the best thing you can do is get information from the people who actually live there or who have traveled there extensively recently. I can count on one hand the amount of negative things that have happened to me while traveling over the past 10 years. I've had my phone stolen on the streets of Rio de Janeiro. I have had my debit card information hacked twice, and that was actually both in the United States, once in San Diego, once in New Jersey actually, and I've had to pay off a bribe one time for the equivalent of about $5 US. Remember, you're never gonna be 100% safe all the time. Adventure is about being informed, prepared, and taking calculated risks. I like to think about it like this. Remember that scene from Bourne Identity when he's sitting in the diner with that girl and he can tell her everything that's going on around him. He can tell her the license plates outside and what the guy's doing at the bar. I would highly recommend you take a little piece of that when you're traveling.
I can tell you the license plate numbers of all 6 cars outside. I can tell you that our waitress is left-handed and the guy sitting up at the counter weighs 215 pounds and knows how to handle himself. I know the best place to look for a gun is the cab of the gray truck outside. And at this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking.
All right, you don't have to be that paranoid all the time, but my point is be aware of your surroundings and that will keep you safe a majority of the time. All right, now let's jump into the step-by-steps of staying safe while traveling. And the first thing, I actually mentioned it in the last video, and that is to make a copy of all of your most important documents and leave them with a loved one back home. And also keep a copy digitally with you. On top of that, make sure someone back home has your itinerary, or at least your loose itinerary, so they know where you're going to be. But my mother always knows where I'm going to be in the world, even if I can send her a pre-itinerary of where I'm going to be. Let's say traveling across Russia on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, she knew each stop along the journey and the dates I was supposed to be there. Obviously, there are some things that go a little bit more unplanned, but try to check in whenever you can, or at least give a rough itinerary so someone can keep track of you. I'd recommend writing down emergency contact info physically and keeping it with you. Maybe create a card, and that information will be your local embassy, emergency contact numbers, and any information that you need just in case maybe your phone gets stolen or you're stuck in a jam and you need to call somebody and you don't have access to get those numbers. Keep that with you all the time just in case of emergencies. And the third thing to do upon arrival, make sure you check into your country's embassy. And for the United States citizens, you can simply fill out a form online, and this just helps people keep track of which citizens are in which country, just in case any natural disaster happens or anything where they would need to contact you or make you aware of situations. they can do that by knowing that you're in the country. So I highly recommend checking in with the embassy once you get settled. It's just nice to have other people watching your back as well. Number 4, local connections are everything. And I've said this in plenty of these videos, but any chance you can get to interact with a local, befriend a local, I highly recommend it. Even if it's the Uber driver on the way from the airport to your hotel, if you can have a conversation about where you should go, where you should eat, where you shouldn't be, this is highly recommended. Anytime you can get local perspective and information, it's a win for your trip. The only caveat with this is just make sure that you can trust them. In many situations, people will come up to you and say, "Hey, can I help you?" Or they'll seem very friendly. And in that situation, take a step back and make sure you're analyzing what could possibly go wrong. What's the benefit for them to be speaking with you? But with a local you do trust, every single one of the following scenarios can be benefited from having someone that knows the local culture, that knows the area, that knows the language to help you. Along those same lines, number 5 is strength in numbers. And just because you're traveling solo, that doesn't mean you always have to be alone, especially if you're out at night. If you want to go hiking or camping, for example, in an area that you don't know very well, why not ask a few more people? Or at least ask a local, "Hey, I plan on doing this. Do you think that's safe for me to do alone?" It's always best to ask someone who knows better. I am all for traveling solo, and obviously I created this course to help you guys travel solo as well. But in certain situations, in certain places, it pays to have people with you. And number 6 walks a tight line with number 5, and that is limit what you tell strangers. People will come up to you in conversation and say, "Oh, where are you staying?" And if you're staying alone, not in a hostel or hotel or somewhere secure, limit what you tell them. I will often say, "Oh, I'm in such and such neighborhood. I don't remember what street." Or "I'm over there by the cathedral." And I always try to keep it vague until I really get to know them. For example, you know the first Taken movie with Liam Neeson? That's a pretty crazy and unrealistic movie. But the truth is, that beginning scene when they arrive at that airport and the kid's there talking them up and then they go back to their house and he knows where they live, you want to try to avoid this. Hopefully you'll watch Taken. Hopefully it won't freak you out enough not to travel, but be aware of all of those possibilities. Also, with social media the way it is today, I limit what I post in real time. Usually my Instagram stories are a few days behind, and not only because I'm running around a lot, but also for my own safety. I don't need somebody just popping up to a restaurant that I'm at or popping up on the streets or wherever I may be. Keep yourself safe. Be careful what you post on social media. And the next one is being aware of common scams. And there are so many across the globe, from markets and bazaars all the way to the airport and everything in between. What you'll want to do is make a Google search, common scams in the location that you're going to, because there is so many to talk about. For example, in Ecuador, I remember they would take mustard bottles or sauce bottles, they'd squirt it on your shirt, and then as you were paying attention to the stain, they would try to help you clean it up. Meanwhile, someone else on their team is going through your pockets without you noticing. So that's just one of many scams that you should be aware of when traveling. And I'll actually leave a document within this course so you can go through some of the most popular ones around the world, just so you're aware and so you have your head on a swivel when you're out in public. And remember, I know there's a lot of smoke and mirrors when you're traveling, but if something is too good to be true, it probably is. One of my good friends while living in Colombia met a beautiful woman at a grocery store in the middle of the day. And she said, "Why don't we go back to your house?" He was an average looking guy. She was a beautiful woman. He thought, what could possibly go wrong? I have been looking good lately. He went back to his apartment. Sure enough, they had a drink. She put something in his drink. He passed out. She unlocked the door for someone to come in. They stole all of his stuff. They took off running, and he woke up a few hours later without knowing anything that happened. So be aware, if something is too good to be true, it probably is. And speaking of which, number 8 is be aware when you're hooking up. I know that late night booty call is very enticing, or meeting that girl or that boy at the bar is very exciting, but be aware of your surroundings at all times. Try to leave together with friends and don't go off by yourselves until you know the area is safe. And if you're going off on that late night booty call, try to take an Uber versus walking. And even better, if you can get them to come to your place, it would be much safer. And if you do invite people over to your place, make sure your stuff is secure if you don't know them very well, and make sure other people know that they are there as well. That will minimize your risk of someone coming inside of your house and stealing everything. And on top of this, whether you're at home or in the bars, make sure you are always in eyesight of your drink. That is one of the easiest and best ways to get someone off their game. And now these days with online dating, it makes things even trickier. You want to make sure that for your first date, you meet somewhere in public where there's lots of people around. And try not to tell them too much private information about yourself if you're not completely comfortable. And again, don't tell them where you're staying unless you feel very comfortable or if you're in a secure location. Interesting story, I had a travel friend recently who went out on a Tinder date when he was traveling. The girl said, I'm here, I'm close by, come around the corner from your hostel and we'll leave in this taxi that I'm in right now. And luckily, he thought that was suspicious late at night. He said, why don't you just pull around? She said the taxi won't do that. He said, I'm not gonna come over there. She said, okay, well, I need money to go pay the taxi. So she walked around the corner, no taxi in sight, got $20 from him to pay the taxi, went back around the corner, and he never saw her again. So maybe there was something even bigger waiting for him around that corner. Luckily, in this case, he got away with only $20. That's pretty cheap for a first date if you ask me. But the moral of the story is be aware of every possible situation. And carrying on from this, the 9th way to stay safe while traveling is knowing how to party. And I love a good party, don't get me wrong. But when I'm traveling, I drink a lot less than when I'm in a safe place at home. Now I'll let loose if I have a good group of friends around me to watch my back, but otherwise it's usually 1 to 3 drinks max to keep my wits about me. It also depends a lot on the safety of the location. I'll drink a lot more highballs in Tokyo than I will aguardiente in Bogota. And that's just because in general, it's much safer at night in Japan than it is in Colombia. And as for hard drugs, just don't mess with them. I understand if you get them from a secure location, and just like excessive drinking, you take some in a secure group. That's fine. But for the most part, don't mess with them. I know cocaine is a lot cheaper in Medellin than it is back home in Melbourne, but you're just asking for trouble. While living in Medellin, I saw so many Australian, Israeli, and American bros getting themselves into bad situations because they think they're immune to the laws and consequences of a local place while they're traveling. And I get it, there's some incredible places to party on this planet. Thailand, for example, everybody goes there when they're younger, and it's an incredible place to party. Just be smart, respect local culture, and understand you are not immune to local laws. All right, next up, number 10 on ways to stay safe while you're traveling is transportation. And Uber has made this much safer. It used to be taxis were a huge problem for travelers. They wouldn't charge the correct amount, they would take you to the wrong location. But now ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft make it much safer for people to get around in private transportation. Now, taxis are still popular in certain places around the world, so you will have to use them from time to time. Just make sure if you're leaving from the airport getting into a taxi, it is a true certified registered taxi. There's a lot of fake taxis out there, especially from the airport. Secondly, make sure the meter is always on. Sometimes you'll be driving and you'll realize the meter isn't going and they'll start it later, or they'll start with a different setting, like it should be for nights and weekends. There's usually a higher setting for taxis, and just make sure you're on the correct setting for the meter as well. If there is no meter, make sure the price is determined before you get into the taxi. That is very important. And in regards to public transportation, this is actually where I feel the safest. Blending in with locals amongst the crowd. Just in this situation, whether it's metros, subways, or buses, make sure you have all of your things within eyesight. Make sure your bag is in front of you. Make sure all of your valuables are out of reach of any pickpockets. But we'll talk about that more in a second. And moving right into the next topic, and that is being aware of predators. This is probably one of the scariest aspects when you think about staying safe while traveling, and that is being robbed, mugged, kidnapped, or even worse when you're on the road. And very generally speaking, thieves are like jaguars. They prey on the fact that you're not paying attention. The element of surprise is one of their biggest weapons. So you can avoid a very high percentage of these scenarios simply by being aware of your surroundings. The first thing to do is make direct eye contact and let them know that you are aware that they are there. For example, I was walking through the streets of Quito one day and a girl ran up to me on the street. At first I was taken aback and I kept my distance from her, and she said, "Please help me, 2 men are trying to rob me." And I walked forward a little bit to assess the situation. Sure enough, around the corner about 100 yards away, 2 men came around looking pretty rough, and they came straight towards us. They crossed over to the other side of the street and were walking on the sidewalk that was parallel to us. As we sped up, they would speed up. As we slowed down, they would slow down. And finally, I took the girl's hand that I was with and I turned to them and I just stared directly at them, thinking that they would make a decision if they would come towards us or they would run away. I figured it was a busy street. I wasn't going to let them walk us into a more secluded area. So I stopped, made them aware that I knew that they were there and they were watching us, and they ended up taking off. Immediately when we stopped, they stopped and looked directly at me, and then they took off. I walked her to her office building that was close by, and that was it. Body language and how you carry yourself when you're alone is a great deterrent to potential predators. With women, I understand it's much different, and we'll dive deeper into that in the interview section of this course when I sit down with solo female travelers and ask them their best safety tips. So make sure you watch those as well. One example of body language is, and I'm not sure if this actually worked or not, but I used to walk home from my bartending shift in Buenos Aires. The subways were closed and I just didn't have enough money for taxis every night at that time. So what I would do was I'd wear a black hoodie every night to work. And on the way home, I would put the hood up on that black hoodie and I would walk directly home as quick as I can, head down, hoodie on, and I thought if I acted crazier than someone trying to mug me, maybe they would think twice. And lucky enough, I've never been robbed in that situation. If someone is following you, make sure you get into a shop or a restaurant or stop anyone on the side of the street and pretend you're having a conversation with them until the person passes, until the coast is clear. But again, just be aware of your surroundings at all times. And also, before you leave on that first big travel trip, I would recommend maybe taking some self-defense classes. A few weeks of a martial art like Krav Maga or Jiu-Jitsu would go a long way. And the next thing, number 12, one of the most important things I can tell you, trust your gut. Like I said before, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And if something just doesn't feel right, back up and reassess the situation. And this is a tough one because some of the best adventures happen with people that you just meet. Just evaluate the situation and how safe you are. The most spontaneous and exciting adventures on the road over the past 10 years has been because someone just randomly said, "Hey, do you want to go out to my grandfather's camp for a weekend?" Or, "Hey, would you like to go with us on this road trip?" So assess how dangerous it could be and make a decision based on your gut. Next up on how to stay safe while traveling is dealing with those pesky pickpockets. Being pickpocketed or having your stuff stolen unknowingly is perhaps the most common thing I hear from solo travelers. And honestly, with more than 75% of the stories that I've heard, the situation could have been avoided. First, stop using your back pockets to carry things of value. And on top of that, stop using jacket pockets without zippers or clips. The contents are not directly touching your body and thus making it easy for someone to steal. And secondly, if you're sitting at a restaurant, especially outdoors, let's say overlooking a plaza, a cathedral, or a park, make sure that your valuables are not just sitting around next to you. It makes for an easy grab and go from somebody that's walking by. Now, I don't have those jackets or pants with 100 pockets. I just keep my cell phone and my valuables in my front 2 pockets. I keep my hands in my pockets whenever I'm in a crowd, and that's how I've deterred any pickpockets for the last 10 years. And if you're out and about, let's say exploring a new city, only take out what you need for the day. If you have a secure place back at your hotel, hostel, or homestay, make sure you leave all of your valuables back there. Take out just enough cash that you need, a credit card, and important information. You can leave your passports back in your homestay or your hotel, and also that nice jewelry and that watch, leave that back at your accommodation, or even better, leave it at home. You don't need it, and it just makes you a bigger target. As you know, I travel very slowly, so I stay in homestays like Airbnb or Vrbo, or I'll stay in an apartment, and with that, I will leave most of my valuables at home. I only take out with me for the day what I absolutely need. And in some places around the world, it's not a good idea to take out your cell phone or camera when you're out in public. Something very easy for somebody to come by and snatch. For example, the story that I've told plenty of times, the only time that I've been robbed in the past 10 years, I was taking a photo outside on the streets of Rio de Janeiro. Kid on a bike came through and scooped up my cell phone. You want to be very aware of grab and go guys when you're in the streets. Now again, this isn't meant to scare you, it's just meant to prepare you. And if I'm not at a homestay or an apartment or a house, and I am staying at a hostel or a hotel, I bring my own padlock and I make sure I lock my stuff up in lockers. Now at hotels, you can lock your stuff in those safes, but I never trust them because the cleaning service or certain people in security still have access codes or keys to get into that. So I just bury my valuables in my big suitcase and I'll usually lock that up. I also bring my own TSA pre-approved locks for my big suitcase when I'm traveling. Sometimes certain airports, people have been known to go through different luggages, so I bring my own padlock. And in some airports, you can actually pay to have your luggage plastic wrapped safe, but I actually just use those TSA locks and that's good enough for me. Also, when you're getting onto public transportation, let's say a bus or a train for a long journey, make sure you watch your bag get stowed away if you need to stow it away. Your large luggage needs to go under the bus. Make sure you watch it go in there and other bags around it, and make sure you watch it all the way until you take off, because in very rare situations, once you get on that bus, someone will come and take your luggage out from under the bus and take off with it. Either the bus driver is in on it or they're negligent. Again, this is very rare cases. Just keep your eyes on your stuff as much as you can. And when I am traveling from place to place and I need to bring all of my stuff with me, I hide my valuables, my credit cards, debit cards, and cash in different locations across my backpack and also my big travel suitcase. And when you are on public transportation, make sure you have your backpack with all your valuables directly in front of you. Whether you're sitting down or standing up, make sure it's in front of you. And ladies, when you're walking or going anywhere, make sure your purse is in front of you as well. Again, when you're sitting at a restaurant and you have your backpack with you, I make sure to wrap the strap of my backpack around the leg of my chair or the leg of the table to keep it safe from anybody walking by, grabbing it and going. And if you're on long bus rides or trains, I actually use a carabiner to hook my backpack to something secure next to me so someone can't grab and go with that either. One popular thing for pickpockets to do is use a box cutter or a knife and slash open your backpack to steal your valuables. There are slash-proof backpacks out there. I don't use one. I'm just aware of all of my valuables at one time. I make sure they're in front of me, I make sure they're next to me, and I make sure they're secure. And above most other things, make sure your passport is in a secure location. Very rarely do you actually need it, so once you do use it, put it away in a very secure location where nobody can get to it, that you always remember and you don't lose it. I've heard way too many stories of people losing their passports for very careless reasons. Keep your eye on your passport, because getting a new one or traveling without it is a pain in the ass. So be aware of your valuables, keep them in sight all the time. And now moving on to the next category, and that is how to keep your money safe. First off, I don't bring in a lot of cash with me when I arrive to a new place. The best exchange rates, as we've talked about before, are local ATMs getting out local currency versus me bringing a bunch of US dollars into the country and trying to exchange them there. You just don't get as good of a rate. I do, however, keep an emergency stash of about $200 to $300 depending on where I'm going in between my two bags, my big luggage and my backpack, only for emergency situations. $200 to $300 can get you out of most sticky situations in most countries. I also have a backup credit card that I keep stowed away deep inside my luggage only for emergency purposes. And make sure you tell all your banks where you're going so your cards don't get blocked, and set reasonable withdrawal limits. I usually set my limits to about $500 US, and if I need to buy something bigger, like a camera in the Philippines, which I did, you can always make a phone call to your bank, and that's the benefit, as we talked about in previous videos, of having a bank where you can call them directly and actually speak to someone. And now let's talk about ATM machines, a transaction that can put you in a lot of risk if you're not paying attention. First, always use an ATM within the bank whenever possible. Second, if you can't do that and you're outside of an ATM, make sure you check all of your surroundings. Is there people just hanging out? Is there other people using the ATM? Be aware of your surroundings before you take your card out and step up to the machine. Test out the ATM itself. If possible, have someone use it before you to make sure it works. But if there's nobody around, actually grab the card reader itself and see if that moves at all. Make sure no one else has came and put a device over the top of that card reader. And as I'm sure you've heard, make sure you put your hand over as you enter your PIN so that any cameras cannot pick up your information. And if your card does get eaten by the machine, run your fingers over the slit and see if there's something covering it up. Sometimes people will put a plastic or some device within the card slot itself, so you put your card in there and then they can take it out after. So before you leave and consider it done, make sure you check the slot first. As I've mentioned, I've had my debit card information swiped twice, and it was actually both in the United States. The San Diego incident actually happened at a gas station when I was paying at the pump. So nowadays, if I'm paying with credit, debit, or cash, I go inside to the gas station and pay at the till. And overall, wherever possible, try to stay with your credit card. If someone takes it at a restaurant to go pay up at the front, go with it. That makes it much less likely that your credit card will be ran through one of those credit card information stealing devices that is prevalent around the world. And on a continuation of this is cyber safety. Make sure you do not log into your bank information using public Wi-Fi or any cyber cafe. Even if the Wi-Fi is password protected, make sure you're using either a password manager or a VPN to protect all of your assets. It is so easy for your information to get swiped online these days, so make sure you are not logging in to any of your important accounts when you're using public Wi-Fi or at a cyber cafe especially. If you need to check your accounts or do financial work, make sure you're in a secure location to do that, or have a password manager device or a VPN. And on top of that, in terms of technology and safety, make sure you always have a tracking app or device on your laptop and cell phone. Find My iPhone is an easy one for iPhone users, and there's a lot of applications for laptops as well. So be sure to use those. And number 16 on our travel safety checklist is food and water safety. And we talked about this a lot in the last video, but I just want to reiterate. Go to popular street food stalls if you have that urge to go to street food. Second, make sure you're drinking filtered water or the tap water is okay to drink. On top of that, bring your own filter to double check and make sure when you're in remote locations, you'll have clean water. Make sure you don't eat raw vegetables or fruits without very thick husks when you're just starting out in a new place. If you do have allergies, I would recommend bringing a card along with you that you have translated the certain items that you cannot have. You can give that to restaurants, you can give that to street food stalls, and they can double check themselves and make sure they're not serving you anything that you can't have. It's a good thing to carry along with you. And number 18, and this is often overlooked, and that is respect local dress codes. Dress simply and follow local cultures, and don't make yourself a bigger target to criminals and or authorities by what you have on. I've seen way too many women dress incredibly inappropriately in conservative places, and way too many men wearing fancy, very expensive shoes or watches in places that they really shouldn't. A simple Google search for dress codes of a place before you arrive goes a long way. For example, crop tops at mosques are not a good idea. And number 19, my final thought on how to stay safe while traveling is this. Do as the locals do, and don't as the locals don't. If you want to hike up to a waterfall and people are telling you don't do that, don't do that. If you want to go cliff jumping and locals are saying don't do that, don't do that. You don't know what's under the water. You don't know if there's rocks there. In Australia, for example, there was a lot of stories of people getting hurt or even killed in the outback in some of these waterfall locations that we were going to because they were cliff jumping without knowing the area. Do as the locals do, don't as the locals don't. Travel and adventure is all about calculated risk. Keep your head on a swivel, ask locals, make sure you keep your eyes on your valuables. Don't be out by yourself at night. Try to keep your nose clean, be aware, be attentive to your surroundings, and have a blast. This video wasn't meant to scare you. It was hopefully an inspiration for you to be prepared and be aware and be attentive while you're traveling. And if you do that, you will have the best time. That's it. Let's keep moving.